By the early 1930s, the United States economy had collapsed. The stock market crashed, banks failed, farmers struggled, and millions of people lost their jobs. The country needed solutions, and it needed them fast. Enter President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, better known as FDR. His understanding of the struggles of everyday Americans didn't come from Washington, D.C. or his hometown of New York City. Instead, it came from a tiny town in Georgia called Warm Springs. There, he saw families without electricity, farmers barely making a living, and communities that had been left behind by booming cities. These were real people living with real struggles. What he witnessed in Warm Springs helped shape one of the most ambitious plans in United States history, the New Deal. The New Deal was a series of government programs designed to pull the country out of the Great Depression by putting people back to work, fixing the economy, and preventing another collapse. But bold ideas don't always come without pushback. In Georgia, FDR's plan ran straight into resistance from Governor Eugene Talmadge. Talmadge believed the New Deal cost too much, gave the federal government too much power, and threatened Georgia's way of life. This is the story of how a small Georgia town helped shape a president and sparked a battle in the state during one of America's toughest times. In 1921, at the age of 39, Franklin Roosevelt became seriously ill. He was diagnosed with polio, a paralyzing disease that affected his ability to walk. For years, he searched for ways to strengthen his legs. Then, in 1924, he learned about the warm mineral waters of Warm Springs, Georgia. The waters weren't a cure, but they helped him rebuild some of his strength. More importantly, Warm Springs introduced FDR to rural life in Georgia. He saw poverty firsthand, families without electricity, farmers struggling to survive, and communities left behind by booming cities. He returned often to Warm Springs and eventually built a home there known as the Little White House. He also helped establish a rehabilitation center in Warm Springs, which still helps people with disabilities today. These visits shaped the way FDR thought about government. If you want to help people, you have to see their struggles for yourself. When FDR became president in 1933, the Great Depression was at its worst. Agricultural prices had collapsed. Banks were failing. Unemployment was rampant. It was clear that relief from churches and charities wasn't enough. So immediately after taking office, FDR launched the New Deal. The New Deal was a series of federal programs created to help the nation recover. It focused on three main goals, often called the 3 R's: relief for the unemployed, recovery of the economy, and reform to prevent future economic disasters. Between 1933 and 1940, the federal government sent about $250 million to Georgia alone. That's about $6 billion today. That money expanded education, improved healthcare, and modernized the state's infrastructure. There were a number of New Deal programs, but let's take a look at some of the ones that had the most significant impact on Georgia. First up, the Civilian Conservation Corps. The CCC was a program that hired young men to plant trees, build parks, and prevent floods. In Georgia, over 78,000 men worked in the CCC, leaving a legacy still visible in state parks today. Another program was the Rural Electrification Administration, or REA. It brought electricity to farms and rural homes, giving families lights, refrigerators, and water pumps for the first time. There was also the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which paid farmers not to grow certain crops to help raise prices. Yep, you heard that right. The government actually paid farmers to avoid growing specific crops like cotton. And the plan worked. Cotton that sold for just 6 cents a pound in 1932 rose to about 12 cents by 1935. This helped large landowners the most. It also had a big impact on sharecroppers and tenant farmers who were displaced when landowners were paid not to plant crops. In a way, the AAA ended sharecropping and tenant farming jobs, work that had often taken advantage of these laborers. Still, the program showed that the government could step in during a crisis. Another part of the New Deal was the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC. This agency still exists today and protects people's money by insuring bank deposits up to a certain amount. So if a bank fails, customers don't lose all their savings. And most famously, there was the Social Security Administration, or SSA. This program provided a safety net for the elderly, disabled, and unemployed, a program that's still essential. FDR's experiences in Warm Springs had shown him that the government could make a real difference in the lives of ordinary people. But not everyone in Georgia welcomed the New Deal. Its strongest opponent was Governor Eugene Talmadge. Talmadge was a fiery speaker who appealed to rural voters by calling himself a real dirt farmer. He believed that hard work alone, not government programs, was the answer to poverty. He argued that the New Deal was too expensive, gave the federal government too much power, and interfered with states' rights. He especially opposed programs that paid black workers the same wages as white workers. To Talmadge, the New Deal was dangerous government meddling. So during his time as governor, Talmadge slowed or blocked New Deal programs, vetoed efforts to join Social Security, and warned that President Roosevelt's policies were leading the country toward communism. As a result, Georgia became politically divided. Many voters supported FDR and wanted access to federal money for electrification, schools, and healthcare. Others sided with Governor Talmadge and feared losing traditional ways of life. In the 1936 elections, pro-New Deal candidates won major victories in Georgia, showing that most Georgians wanted the benefits of federal programs, even if they didn't agree with everything about them. Over time, many New Deal programs have faded away, but their impacts on Georgia were long-lasting. In the end, Warm Springs was more than a retreat for a president. It was a classroom. What President Roosevelt saw in rural Georgia shaped how he led the nation through its darkest economic crisis. His New Deal brought electricity, jobs, financial security, and hope to millions, including those in Georgia. At the same time, Eugene Talmadge's fierce opposition showed that Americans didn't always agree on how much help was too much or who should control it. Together, their stories remind us that policies don't come from nowhere. Sometimes, they begin in small towns, shaped by real people, real debates, and real struggles.